I don't know how many times I have heard victims come back and say that the narcissistic ex returns claiming that they've changed. And they ask to be in the relationship or to rejoin the family, claiming that it's the best interest of everybody involved. In narcissistic abuse circles, this is what's called hoovering. Thank you so much for joining me today on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience and a narcissistic abuse survivor. In this podcast episode, we're going to explore if agreeing to this request is wise. And what do we mean when we talk about breadcrumbing? We're going to also take a closer look at the connection between gaslighting and cognitive dissonance. Please leave a review and let us know what you think. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and consider donating the cost of a cup of coffee as a show of your support for our mission to help set abuse victims free from toxic relationships. So let's listen in to this replay of a TikTok Live.
I find people's reaction to abuse fascinating. Some of us, when we see it happening to somebody else, we are moved by compassion. We become convicted that we want to help. It bothers us. Others of us become irritated. We even go on the attack as if it's an offense against us personally. We begin to abuse this individual, maybe even. It's interesting to me, the wide range that there is to abuse. And it gets me to wonder why. Have you ever questioned the motive behind, say, a troll? Say that you put something out on the internet and you get a lot of crap back. I just saw a video of a young man who shared how he had seen somebody at a gym and he was intrigued by this individual and he was thinking about asking them to go out. And he put this out as a video, and apparently it came to the attention of hundreds of women who attacked him using even the puke emoji, saying what a dog and how awful and how nobody would ever want him and that he's so ugly. And he posted another video of himself crying, which he wasn't trying to cry. He was actually trying to hide the fact that he was teary, but he basically said that the response to the video was so overwhelmingly intense and hostile that he has now taken his dating profiles off the app, and he has changed his gym routine so he doesn't bump into this woman that he had hoped to go out with. In other words, he basically withdrew all effort or interest or intentions to have any kind of romantic relationship ever with anyone, if that was the response that he got from women. I've known, I know that my content tends to be about women's experience in this world, which then obviously it's about a lot of times about men, but it's also about families. But I have always known that it's equally bad on both sides, that women are no nicer to men than men are nice to women. But it fascinated me, why jump in? This guy wasn't talking about the women who responded. He was talking about somebody in his life. Why say something? All of us, there's an inner critic inside all of us. It's called we call it the inner critic, but it's also really what's referred to in psychology as the shadow, your shadow side. I believe, I have the perspective that our entirety of ourself, unconscious, preconscious, and conscious self, is invested in our adaptation, that is attempting to keep us alive and surviving. And it's well-intended. It may do bad things, but it's well-intended. It's doing what it's learned to get ahead. And maybe that worked when you were 4, and maybe it looks really bad when you're 35, but this is your worldview. Now, I'm not saying it justifies bad actions. I'm not saying that. But it's what you learn to get through a really tough time. This inner critic that often attacks us, but it's also a critic of the world, it actually also, it attacks things that make it scared, the things that create anxiety and tension inside you. So if you're a person who's insecure about who you are and how people think of you, then when you see insecurity in someone else, you're going to attack that because you don't want to see it around you, because you identify at an unconscious level that you're not aware of, you identify with that vulnerability. You hate it in yourself, so then you hate on it when you see it around you. I think most of us don't realize how much of ourselves we're revealing when we respond. Yes, most of us, when we get hit with this kind of personal attack, we take it personally. But what we're really actually seeing is we're seeing this person's insecurity worked out on us. I wish I could remember that in the moment. I don't remember it because I, like everybody else, am in my own body. And at the time when it happens, it's upsetting. But it's really more informative about the one who's doing the attacking than actually the one who's being attacked. This guy is a neutral guy. He's an average Joe. He is definitely somebody's cup of tea. Definitely. And now that I've seen him emote, by the way, guys, any men on you want to touch a woman's heart. Now, be careful on this because I know that there are exceptions. But for a lot of us, to see your vulnerability, your soft side, the tender side, is a huge turn on. It makes you suddenly very attractive. And sure enough, this guy's account, I went and looked at the comments coming in. It's that one that where he was being teary had 58,000 likes. And there were hundreds of comments, and it was all in support of him. And I wasn't surprised because his vulnerability made him appealing. It made him very, very appealing. But I find that fascinating today, and I also want to make sure we talk about cognitive dissonance. In fact, I have my book open, Love You More, The Harrowing Tales of Lies, Sex Addiction, and Double Cross. I'm going to read a little section of it where you can see how very confused I am, and the fact that the confusion is a sign that I'm experiencing cognitive dissonance. How do you get yourself out of a depressive episode? That's tough. Depression is actually a mental health condition. It's something that happens to us. I once heard that if you didn't treat depression at all, a certain portion of depression would recover on your own. In other words, that just like a cold has a course of illness, so does depression. But there is a law, and again, I don't know if this holds up with research. There is what we would refer to within the clinical field, a law of thirds. There's people who have a depressive episode one time and they'll never have depression again. There's a third of the people who have a recurring struggle with depression. And then there's a third who will really struggle to come out of a depression. They just have what's called, can't think of the word, sort of like a non-responsive depression. It's very difficult to treat. But there's different kinds of modality. It kind of depends on your history and whether or not you've had depression before. But a lot of times we use, the first thing we do out of the gate is use a medication that's an SSRI, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And if you don't respond, then we kind of move into the second line, which is a little more complex medication. It affects more areas of the brain. That one might be, for example, Wellbutrin would be one that's kind of atypical type. But there's types of depression or antidepressants we use that are kind of out of not the first line, but second line. When you have someone who has a resistant depression, they actually sometimes think about ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. It's shock therapy, but it's done differently these days. But that's only last line when there's not really a good response to medication. But yeah, I'm sorry to hear that you're struggling and that's been a difficult road. It's really important. If you're struggling with depression, it's actually not a feeling. I often know we use this as a feeling state like, oh, I feel depressed today. No, it's actually a condition, and it has a whole list of symptoms. It includes hopelessness, helplessness, struggle sleeping, or not being able to sleep, difficulty with the appetite. Maybe you're overeating or you have no appetite at all. Everything feels dark. People who have depression say that the world looks dark, feels like it's just gotten really, even visually gets dark. They feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel and it's not going to get better. They feel really socially withdrawn. There's a low energy. They really struggle to have any energy. Motivation is gone. It's just it's a miserable place. It's a miserable place. If you're gray rocking, separated to divorce, how do you deal with a narcissist at grandchildren's birthdays, graduations, and recitals? So do we all know what gray rock is? And do we actually know what the intentions of the gray rock is? So gray rocking is when you become emotionally detached from someone and you use very bland responses, whenever they want you to engage. Everybody knows how toxic people are so good at pushing hot buttons and making us very upset. They'll say something in a provocative way. Could be just even a statement like, yeah, you know how your mother is. She has to have things just her way. It could be just a dig or a sarcastic passing, or even like, oh, I'm getting to be just like you. I got to watch out for that. But they'll find some way to hurt you and to push one of your buttons. Gray rock is essentially a change in attitude first. And this is what people get wrong, and why it goes wrong is they don't have a change of attitude. They just try to use the technique and then wonder why it doesn't work. So what has to happen inside of you? And this was hard work. I remember struggling with this. You have to move to a place where you cease to be invested in this person's opinion. Do you hear what I'm saying? I'm saying you basically have to get to the place where they're not important to you and you're not looking to them to have an opinion. You're not looking to them to give you feedback or even to think positively about you. That's a lot of mental work that has to happen. Now, it takes time and it's a process. So I knew I had days of victory and I had days where I was insecure or I was missing him or I wanted our relationship to work out, and I began becoming invested again. Be kind to yourself as you're working on the process. But the second part of it is, I want to add one more caveat to that. Don't use gray rock for revenge. You're not giving the toxic person a piece of their treatment. If that's the point, then you've already engaged, you're reacting, and you've already failed. It won't work. They will sense it. Guys, these people have almost like a reptilian ability to pick up on what upsets us and our intentions. So if you're doing this as a way to get them back, they know it. And they already are happy because they don't care it's negative attention. To them, any attention is good attention. So be very, very careful on how you use this. What you do is you respond emotionally neutral, like disengaged, disinterested. Imagine that somebody that you don't know walked up to you in the grocery store and asked something of you or said something of you, and this is a person that you hardly even know, recognize, or care about. You would give a bland, no big deal statement like, I don't know, or really? Huh, that's interesting. Or, well, if it works for you, you have to find something, you want a statement that works for the situation, but make it bland and not emotional. So for you going into this birthday situation where you're going to be encountering this person, or graduations or other family events, think of the possible comments this person's going to say, because you know them, you've been living with them a long time. So think about how they may approach you or what they may say, and then come up with some practice statements, and practice them. Come up with some statements and practice them so that when it happens, you're ready and you can pull it right out. I want to read an excerpt of an example of cognitive dissonance and what it was like for me. And this comes out of my book, Love You More, The Harrowing Tales of Lies, Sex Addiction, and Double Cross. Caesar finished dressing before me. I'm going to go down and have a drink. I'll be in the lounge. Okay, I won't be long, I answered from the bathroom. Once I'd finished, I went looking for him. Except for the bartender, the lounge area was empty. I wandered the old hotel's maze of small rooms filled with antiques, and finally located Caesar on the opposite side. He stood beside a beautiful young woman. They bent their heads near one another as though engaged in a private conversation. The woman threw her head back, laughing at something he said. He chuckled, looking pleased, and their eyes met. I stopped dead in my tracks, unable to look away. We're here so Caesar can tell his mother about his sexual addiction, and he's flirting with another woman? After taking a deep breath, I strode towards them. Caesar smiled broadly and waved one arm towards me. Carrie, I'd like you to meet Selena, the manager of this hotel. Selena, this is my wife. I stood a bit taller and stuck out my hand. Nice to meet you. With a cool gaze, the woman grasped the ends of my fingers. Her faint smile never reached her eyes. Hello, she said. Nice to meet you. She turned to resume speaking in Spanish to Caesar. Her face came alive and her eyes twinkled. She leaned closer and giggled about something, touching his arm. I'd become an unwanted intruder. Shaking with fury, I considered wrapping my arms around Caesar's waist to stake my claim, but then thought better of the idea. I'm not playing this game. Instead, I slipped away to admire the furniture on display. Caesar startled me by whispering in my ear, Ready to go? "I've been waiting for you," I said. "Do you know what you'd like to eat?" "You wanted steak." "It was just a suggestion," he said with sudden disinterest. Thrown off balance by his shift in mood, I pulled out the phone and located a nearby restaurant. As we walked in silence, tension mounted. "Selena was just talking about our vacation rental business," Caesar finally said. "She's never been to Playa del Carmen." "Oh?" I asked. "She suggested we swap stays. We stay free at this hotel in exchange of her staying at one of ours," he said. "What do you think?" Why would a manager of a successful hotel in one of Mexico City's wealthiest areas be interested in staying in our condo? "It makes no sense," I said. "Frankly, I think the idea came up because she has the hots for you." "No, you're seeing things." "Was I?" "She stood too close, touched you several times, and didn't even have the decency to be polite to me," I said. "I am not seeing things, and frankly, you encouraged it." I squinted hard. "You were inappropriate, and I'm pissed you didn't include me more." "I don't know what you're talking about." Caesar's mouth fell open. "I don't buy that. You're not an idiot," I said, though with less certainty. Could I have gotten it wrong? The rest of the evening was quiet. So there's an excerpt that comes out of my book, Love You More, The Harrowing Tales of Lies, Sex Addiction, and Double Cross. And you can see there two things that are going on. Well, three things. One, he's acting out, obviously. He and her are flirting, maybe even making plans to hook up. He's gaslighting me. So there's lots of examples of the gaslighting where he's telling me that I didn't see it right, that I got it wrong, that I misread the situation. There's invalidation. He's minimizing my feelings and invalidating my experience. So my upsetness isn't getting any space at all. And then, and it throws me off. You can see that I'm completely confused. And by the end of the conversation, I'm no longer for sure if what I saw what I saw correctly and interpreted it correctly. That's what gaslighting is. Gaslighting takes your reality and substitutes it for the person who's gaslighting you. So his reality is that nothing bad happened. It was an innocent moment, and I'm making a big deal out of nothing. My reality was I saw a married man who's there coming home to see his mother to tell her that he has a sexual addiction problem, and he's flirting with another woman openly in front of everyone. He's substituting the fact that that wasn't happening with my reality of that it was happening. So gaslighting creates cognitive dissonance, which is I'm no longer for sure. I'm now increasingly confused. And the confusion then makes me unable to take action. If I'm wrong, then I shouldn't be upset. And there's no reaction to even have because I think that I'm wrong. So I'm immobilized. That's one reason why when people tell any of us, well, you should just leave. It happened, just leave. What they don't understand is that we're being inundated with information that tells us that what we're experiencing isn't really what we're experiencing, that reality is actually not true. And it creates confusion inside you as a result. So then you don't really know. Because if you're just being highly reactive and overly sensitive, walking out then is the stupid thing to do. It makes you even look worse, weak. Like, see, she can't even take this. She just ups and outs, or he's just at the first drop of the hat or the first tough thing, they just bail. So you end up feeling like you can't authentically be yourself and you can't take action to protect yourself. So then you're stuck. You're just very stuck. That's cognitive dissonance. And that's why we find it so hard to leave.
If you've been on social media much, then you probably heard about sexual or marital coercion. It's when one partner emotionally manipulates the other into being sexually intimate with them. Is this a form of rape? Come listen to a panel of experts discuss this hot topic in an upcoming webinar on October 20th called Isn't Having Sex My Right? I will be joined with a sexologist, a pastor, and other social advocates to explore the connection between sex and intimacy. What is full consent? And how do we improve our intimate connection with others? I can't wait for this webinar. It's going to be the evening of October 20th. Be sure to get your tickets through the show note link below.
My parents and partners are doing this, and I'm now having a hard time trusting my judgment. Yeah, exactly. When it happens over a long period of time, gaslighting is actually very insidious and it has long-lasting detrimental effects. It causes us to really not know ourselves, to know what we're experiencing in our minds and our bodies and our feelings. We distrust our senses. We distrust our interpretations of things. And as a result, then we look to the very one who's abusing us to validate reality. I cannot describe the confusion that it creates. I grew up with chronic gaslighting from childhood. From the minute I was born, my family, extended family and family, all was practiced gaslighting as a way to manage uncomfortable emotions. And when I got into the therapy for the very first time in my life in college, all I did in that therapy session was just validate reality. I would say things like, I'm feeling really nervous about that. Is this normal? And she'd say, yeah, it's normal. I would give some other common, I can't even remember it now, but it would be some ordinary comment that you would think that everybody would know. And I honestly didn't know. I wasn't for sure. I had learned to not listen to myself, not trust any of the things that I experienced, not trust any of my interpretations of things. And I swapped it out for what everybody around me told me. And here's the other part that's super sad about this, is that when you start to do this on a long-term basis, when you begin to just trust yourself, you draw in people who then want to do that to you, who like that control. They see you as sort of a vulnerable opportunity, and then they move in on you. So you end up being surrounded by more people who gaslight you, and it just becomes this perpetuating cycle, which again, I get kind of angry when people attack gaslighted victims or abuse victims and say it's our fault. What they don't appreciate is that this has been, for many of us, it's been brainwashing, chronic deprivation connected with new information. And in order for you to survive the environment, you finally capitulate and give in and then buy into their reality. So it's a survival mechanism. To me, I think actually anybody who's learned to survive these very emotionally hostile environments, way to go. You got out. You survived. Now the trick is, how are you going to heal so that you don't continue to perpetuate that for yourself? That's really important for you to know, for you to figure out how to now let go of it and learn new skills. Love bombing is pretty intoxicating. Are you all able to tell when you're being love bombed versus when you actually meet someone who's falling in love with you? Do you know the difference between those two states? It's hard. I'll tell you, it's hard. And there's nothing, especially if you really have been looking to be loved by someone, when you start to be love bombed, it feels like, you feel like you're walking on water. I mean, it's the most intoxicating experience I've ever had. So what is it? Love bombing is when someone meets, okay, let me back up. When you meet someone new and you are trying to make a sale of, say, I want someone to like me. You meet a date and you want them to like you. All of us do a little bit of this in that we want to make, quote unquote, a sale. We want them to choose us. That's the point of dating. We hope that they'll say, yes, I like you. I'd like to get to know you. So you put your best foot forward and you hide maybe the things that you're a little uncomfortable about so that they will see your best self. That's normal. What the challenge of dating is then how to let go of making the sale once you've okay, we connect, we choose each other, we like each other. Now, how do you change that and make it about having long-term goals together and becoming to develop a partnership together? That becomes the challenge. How do you make that transition? It's a tough transition. Partly because we're trying to make the sale, we put our best foot forward. Now we're revealing who we really are, and that may be, there's some adjustment to that. But what happens with love bombing, with people who are deliberately hoping to attract you, and they've even targeted you. So that's the other thing. Often, not all love bombers are doing this, but a lot of them are. There are sex addicts or love addicts that just need somebody to love them, so they're doing it too. But there are also those who are really trying to groom someone to pull them into a relationship. What happens is the person you meet isn't their best self. They're not just putting their best foot forward and making themselves as appealing as possible. They're actually presenting you with yourself. They falsify themselves so that you meet yourself and feel really connected to them and think that you've met this perfect person, this soulmate. I was not a believer in a soulmate. If you met me pre this last relationship, I would have said it was a bunch of hooey. I didn't buy it. I knew it wasn't true. But yet when I met him, I suddenly began to become a believer about it. I actually said, oh, I think I met my soulmate. I didn't think it was real, but possible it is. And the reason is because we all inherently want to meet ourselves. We have this longing for this twinship, this sense of someone who totally gets us and understands us. That's you. The only person would ever feel that way about you is you. So you love to meet this person. And some of them intentionally know this, like consciously know this, but some of them don't. So I wouldn't say this is true of everybody. But regardless whether they're doing it on purpose or not, they've learned to show up and present you with yourself. They do three things. They mimic you, they mirror you, and then they parrot you. And those are three different things. Mimicking is that they would say back, they would copy the way you do things and do it the same way. Mirroring is to reflect you. So say if you're kind of in a sensitive mood, they would reflect sensitivity back. And then parroting is they say what you're saying and they say it back to you. So for example, you're in a certain kind of music or you know a certain band, they suddenly know this band and they're big fans of them too. And they can tell you stories about it. So they actually tell you what you want to hear. They regurgitate the information that you just gave them and give it back to you. And you think, because you hear this, that you've met somebody just like yourself. That's what I thought. What I heard was somebody who was kind of spiritual side, had kids my age, had similar retirement ideas, same values as me, enjoyed some of the same things that I enjoyed. That's what I heard. And I kept thinking, wow, I actually in my mind saw like a list of qualities and it was check, 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 check. That's what it felt like. And I remember actually thinking in that day, I have never met somebody more compatible. That's what I remember thinking. Yeah, I met myself. That's why I was so compatible. I had no idea. So that's what love bombing is. Now, okay, let's admit this. They're not really showing up. You just met this fantastic mask that developed based on you, and it's a lot of hard work. In fact, I remember when we were dating and engaged, my ex would have deep, dark circles under his eyes. He looked exhausted. Keeping up this facade of being somebody that you're not. Can you imagine if you were like acting and you had to be on? Like those undercover, that's what those undercover doing. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hard work. And what happens over time is as the relationship starts to get deeper and more lasting, it starts to drop. They start to like reveal who they really are. And that's why we call it the living with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You think you met this fabulous Dr. Jekyll, who's all that. But then you start to see the Mr. Hyde part or the Ms. Hyde part and you realize, whoa, who is this person? Now here's where it gets really not good. This is where the cognitive dissonance comes in. Instead of them owning that, yeah, no, I told you I really like so-and-so as a band, but I really don't. I actually like this group over there and I know you hate them, but instead of just owning it, they don't. They gaslight you and say, oh, no, that wasn't me. I'm really like this. And then they kind of go back to the love bombing again. It's to lull you into thinking things are okay and thinking that you know this person and you really don't know this person. That's called breadcrumbing. They give you enough, just enough, not as big as it was when the love bombing phase. It starts to like trickle down. There's a really great video put out by Cynthia. What she did was she said in the beginning, they hand you this whole loaf of bread and say, here, and it's all wrapped up with a big bow. And you're like, oh, thank you so much. That's the love bombing. And then when you get in a relationship, they hand you a few loaves. And then they hand you just a slice of bread. And then before long, when you're really into the relationship and they're getting close to discarding you, they hand you a crumb. And by then, you've been trained to live on less and less and less. And you're like, oh, thank you for the crumb. That's the most, really touches me deeply. And on the other hand, it's essentially nothing at all. So that's what whenever mine had been up to no good, usually here's what would happen. And I didn't recognize the pattern, but interestingly, my unconscious mind recognized the pattern and I began to be triggered by it. So I recognized the triggering first. So what he would do is we would go into a weekend and we would have a fight. And I now think those fights were staged. I don't think he would bring up an issue late at night and we'd have a fight. And of course, he would storm out and stonewall and be gone until early hours of the morning. Convenient. It's a Saturday night and he's gone to the early hours of the morning. Wonder what that's all about. So Sunday would come around and he would get up and take me out for breakfast. And then we would go walking down the shops and he'd see something really expensive and say, wouldn't you like that? I think that would look really pretty on you. And then he would go buy this expensive item. I came to recognize, because I started to shake down the road as the relationship started to get a little older, my hands would shake. He would take me into these stores and my hands would start to shake and I'd get this funny panicked feeling. I realize now that I was recognizing that he was trying to breadcrumb me, pay me back for that he'd done something really, really awful to hurt me. And so my conscious mind hadn't identified it. That's, again, that cognitive dissonance, the confusion that you live in. But yeah, it was very, very, very toxic. What happens with people who have personality disorders is they don't really see people as people. They see people as objects. Like, they collect cars. Say that you know somebody who collects cars and they have a warehouse full of them. And they sometimes go out there and they pull off the dust cover and they admire this car and they really love it. Maybe they even have fantasies of what it would be like to drive, and they do drive it around once in a while. That's how they view our relationships with us. Even though they've moved on to a new supply, new people, new relationships, in their minds, they own you. You are still part of their life and you're still somebody that's significant. When you take people back who've hurt you, they don't see it as grateful. They don't say, oh, wow, I can't believe this person has forgiven me for all these horrible things. No, that's not how they see it. They see it as you've now written off and are tolerating all the previous abuse. It's like you gave an approval stamp to whatever he's done to you before. And what happens is now he respects you less, thinks of you less, and he will do it worse. Please hear me. It gets worse the next time around. So please, I want to warn you, don't. Please be careful. Please be careful. Is there something do you want to get to his motives about why he wants you back? And I guess I want to ask you a question, a very tough question. Why does it matter? It doesn't matter. There is not a good enough reason. There isn't. And even knowing the reason won't change your confusion. I know you end up thinking it's going to make you have a better decision about it. No, the decision has to come from within you. The decision is to know that this puts you back in danger again to the same abuse that you were. And let me also tell you this part. It's no easier breaking a trauma bond the second, third, fourth, fifth time than it is the first time. You know how hard it was to get out the first time around. It will be equally hard to get out the second, third, fourth, and fifth time. It's not any easier. Yeah, I get that. Co-parenting does make it tough. It's very hard when we have to co-parent with toxic people. There are apps that can help get us distance from that. Learning to do gray rock really helps to get distance from that. Chances are, this is going to be my guess, just based on what little bit you said, my guess is that he's seeing your life come together. You're getting healthier. You're looking better. And he wants to be a part of that. So that's why he's now asking to rejoin. But this is about him. Because think of this. If somebody was really healthy and they knew they fucked up things with you and the family and the kids so bad, why would they want to come up and put everyone through that again? Because if he was brutally honest with himself, he knows he's not that healthy. And he knows he hasn't changed that much. So he's not being honest with himself. He's being deluded. He's fooling himself first. And he doesn't care enough of what he's putting through his own kids to think he's going to do it again. That's right there. To me, he's failed, because a humble person who's taken ownership would work really hard on themselves a long time, learn how to show up as a good father, and then through time work his way back into the family. This to me just sounds like another form of ultimate selfishness. Just selfishness. And because we're good people and we're sensitive and we want kids to have two parents, we get blinded to all this and we miss the point that that is just more selfishness on their parts. And we are bringing up some really important points. We often don't talk about what does healing look like. How do we recognize it? I can tell you, hoovering is not healing. Hoovering is more of him acting out his needs. He's not considering you or the family at all.
So, have you been hoovered? How well did that work out for you? Did it end poorly? Drop me a comment, leave me a note on Instagram, and let me know. Did you know you can find me on most social media platforms at Carrie McAvoy PhD? I'd love to connect and hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited you've been here on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you back on Thursday. Until then, bye-bye.